So I'm consistently asked about the definition of sin, consistently. And because I am somebody that studies the Bible, that I am somebody that really looks to define uh, things from a philosophical or concerning the devotional conversations experience from the way or from the way that the Bible processes things. And so I'm asked consistently how the Bible processes things. And depending on the person, I'm able to show actually how the Bible processes things. And from last week up until this point, the subject or the idea of the definition of sin as it is found within the Bible and then as it is found within the book of Job has come up. What is the definition of sin? Which I've reviewed countless times, but this lately being in the book of Job has kind of, taken that and then just brought it out further to individuals listening or reaching out to me or within their own sphere, going through things and seeing things because they're seeing their process of administering their belief through ritual, through routine, through baptism, through belief of quote unquote expert. Well, they're seeing that it has done nothing for them, and they're seeing that it has actually led to a bit of insult to their own intelligence. So they're seeing something wrong with maintaining a routine and believing that by maintaining that routine, that whatever divine eye has ordained that routine is seeing that as being just. Um, Another individual lets me know that when it comes to them and their idea of what it means to honor God, that the human being needs to be guided. The human being needs to be guided when it comes to worshiping God. Now, this isn't coming from me. It's coming from an individual that I spoke to. And their idea of needing a guide, you need the religious laws for being that guide. The religious laws are supposed to guide you into your worship of God. And I can understand, from an individual standpoint of being in that state of mind where this is true and where you're believing that an invisible entity has spoken to human minds, and human minds have taken what the invisible entity has said and has documented it as a strict regimen for pleasing the invisible entity. And so that's the maintenance for the devotional conversation from that aspect is the invisible entity is giving us a guide. And what we see as a guide, what we know as the rites and the movements of the body, they're simply for a guide for worshiping God. Now, what I have been reviewing from the book of Job has kind of, and also from last week's book of Micah, gone against that frame of thought. Because it's true, nobody thinks alike, every experience is different. There's no explanation of why one individual has told me that you need religious laws to be a guide, and then another individual has told me religious laws as a guide has made me less human. So, again, like I've been saying this entire time, the experience, the Exodus experience, because the general experience within the scriptures of the Bible, I should say, within the scriptures of the Bible, is an experience of liberating the conversation's thoughts and feelings from the concept and the construct of the religious law. The individual that I spoke to the other day that told me that you need God for a guide is a Muslim. Within their Quran, strictly it says, I am God, worship me. I am God, worship me. This is one of the verses in the Quran where it's saying, I am God, worship me. And so there's a bit of a difference here between what is written there and then what is found, you could say, in the book of Isaiah, where in the book of Isaiah it says, there is no God beside me. Who else would you turn to? On the one hand, you're seeing, or you're made to feel the force of worship me, I am God. On the other hand, you're made to see a bit more of a thoughtful structure for the condition of the human, saying, well, you're worshiping other gods, but there is none beside me. Why would you want to do that when you know that I can and have been what I am and have been for you thus far? Two different sides, two different stances. And not to draw any sort of anything on that, just to touch on the dialogues that have been going on with me since last week, and one of them being the issue of the religious law and the sin within it, the religious law and the guide that it is, and then the Bible. In every case, whether I'm speaking to the individual that sees religious law as a guide, or whether I'm speaking to the individual that sees religious law as dehumanizing, at the core of it all, I am bringing Bible into it. I'm bringing the philosophy at the core of the Bible into it. And on both sides, there's actually silence, which I find to be interesting. There's actually silence. And that silence is due to how the Bible defines sin. And so, again, being asked, how does the Bible define sin? I have here highlighted the book of Isaiah 59 and 13 in the chat. Isaiah 59, verse 13, in transgressing and lying against the Lord and departing away from our God, speaking oppression and revolt, conceiving and uttering from the heart words of falsehood. Now, this is the main structure of the definition of sin throughout the Bible. Whether you're dealing with when it comes to the law of Moses, when sin comes to the conscience, and Leviticus lets us know that that sin is in transgressing the commandments, or whether you're in the book of Numbers and you're seeing Balaam and you're seeing him being stopped by the figure, or when you're in the book of Job and you're seeing Job canceled, not because of anything within him, but to try what is within him due to him putting everything within him in the rituals and the sacrifices that he has been doing. So I'm always asked what the definition of sin is, and especially this past week. And so I just wanted to, I guess, talk on that, because that's a very it's very weighty to individuals that reach out, individuals that are brought up in a structure of religion, that are brought up in a structure of religious ideology, of religious culture, to where it is automatic. It's automatic that you would want to do a deed or follow a route or pray this many times during the day or anything like that, because the invisible one is the one directing it. But again, the other side of that is individuals are also reaching out and saying the invisible one is making me feel less human by this routine. And so you have in the Bible the surface religious understanding of routine by religious law. But underneath that surface, at the core, is an exodus outside and away from that routine by religious law into a wilderness of your own, not your own personally, of your devotional conversations own, for the purpose of understanding how to construct and what to construct as a tabernacle devoted to the Creator. There's a difference there from within the scriptures. And so the idea of what sin is, we can gather from the book of Job. The idea of what sin is, we can gather from the book of Numbers. The idea of what sin is, we can gather from the book of Isaiah. When it comes to what the definition of sin is, we can understand the definition of sin because Satan appears. Satan appears against the sinner. What was Balaam going to do that made him being withstood against? Well, he was going to speak a message against the living God. What was Job? Job was Sataned against. Why? Why was Job Sataned against? Well, Job was Sataned against because he needed to have what is within him tested. He was just doing a routine for the sake of his belief that it would bring well-being to his uh, spiritually economic self and naturally economic well-being. he was Sataned against because that's false. And the idea of that is there is more. There is more to the individual conversation when it comes to sin and when it comes to the religious law than simply what is called human transgression. The Bible, in a sense, does not deal with human transgression. This is something I like to get across. The Bible does not deal, in essence, with human transgression. Despite how the language is written, despite how colorful it is, despite how natural it may seem, the context and the arrangement of the language therein, when it comes to what the definition of sin is, it has nothing to do with what is human based. From beginning to end, the Bible is a book of correcting religion. Beginning to end, the Bible is a book correcting religion, whether that be practice, whether that be understanding, whether that be engagement, whether that be audience. Bible is correcting. That's all the Bible is doing. Bible is not a traditional, as we would say, a Quran type or a Christian Bible type. Maybe that may sound a little weird, Christian Bible type, but Bible, when I say Bible, I'm saying Genesis to Malachi. Genesis to Malachi. When it comes to the definition of what sin is, because the definition of sin from Matthew to Revelation, it becomes Greek, and we are familiar with a Greek culture, and we associate Greek things to everything. But Genesis to Malachi defines things differently. And that is the standard that I personally hold things to, because that is the standard that I have been trained by the Bible to hold things to. And so when I'm explaining these things, I find it very interesting just to see the look on their faces or to hear the tone of their voice or to hear the thoughts afterwards, because the logic is not my own. It's a logic uncovered from understanding how the Bible rearranges and arranges its language and context. And when it comes to sin, the idea of transgressing and lying against the Lord is sin. What does that mean? That means inventing to self laws that deviate from the devotional character of the living God. So it is, to the Bible's mind, sin is not secular. Sin is not human based. Sin is human based in the form of getting away from the devotional character of the living God. Speaking oppression and revolt, conceiving and uttering words from the heart, words of falsehood. Now, it doesn't have to be literal words that are uttered from the heart. We can actually look at somebody and our heart is uttered. We can actually do something with our bodies and our heart is uttered. And when I'm saying do something with our bodies, keeping within the frame of Isaiah 59:13, keeping within the frame and not going outside of that frame, because the Bible does not ever put a weight of quote unquote transgression against the human being naturally. Bible does not do that and it never will. Because the Bible understands the mind within it that telling someone that what they're doing is wrong is not the way to get them to stop. How many times has somebody told you to do something and instead of stopping, you just did it? Or how many times has somebody told you that this is not the right thing to do, and then you realize, wait a minute, that's not my life, that's not this, that's not that. We have a bunch of arguments against anyone saying anything to us that the person believes is just or correct. We have arguments against it because that's just nature. That's just nature. And Bible works with our nature because at the core of the Bible is a mind of the one that created our nature. And the more you go through this philosophy, it's really difficult. And it's really interesting when I do talk to people and I do talk about the Bible's philosophy. It's really difficult to get the mind of the Bible to people because there is absolutely zero understanding of the mind within the Bible. Not to insult, it's the upbringing. Our upbringing rules our perception. Our environment rules our perception. And unless you're brought into the environment of the Bible, you're not going to understand the definition of just, unjust, sin, not sin, without traditional or superstitious upbringing. And especially in a Greek context, because that's just what religion now tends to in a Greek context. So when I'm explaining these things, it's really always interesting to hear the comments back or to see the looks or to actually hear the silence after as they're pondering, because the philosophy is Eastern. Genesis to Malachi is Eastern, Eastern devotional philosophy, Eastern thought. And so when it comes to sin, the context therein is not human based. You despite how it may sound, despite how it may written, it is written to sound that way, but the philosophy and the scope of it, when you take into the account of the context of the Eastern philosophical thought pattern, you break it down by that way, not by the Western automatic way that we do, well, then you can understand where the Bible is coming from. Uttering words from the heart, words of falsehood, transgressing and lying against our Lord. This is everything that has to do with sin is in transgressing and lying against the devotional character of the living God. That's the foundation of sin. That's the root of what sin is. I can care less because the Bible can care less that you view sin, that I view sin as murder or as lying or as stealing or as sexual intercourse with the same gender or as failing gender identity or as whatever you want to say sin is in a secular sense. That's not what sin is to the Bible. Parameters for sin, the construct of sin for the human being is just that. Sin is a construct. Sin is an invented construct. Think about that. Sin is an invented construct for the human being to keep the human being engaged, or should I say, disengaged from itself. Because at the core of what the human being is the animal rationale. There is no morality in nature. I don't know if you've noticed this, but there is no morality in nature. When an animal wants to protect, an animal protects. When nature wants to swarm with water, nature swarms with water. When nature wants to destroy by tornado, nature destroys by tornado. There's no thought. There's no care for the human being there. Just as the animal doesn't care against anybody coming against its pride, as I'm speaking about a lion. There is no morality in nature. But the human being, like the invisible intelligence from which its spirit comes out of, has a level of consciousness, allowing it to understand regulation and its concept therein. And so the parameters of what philosophically sin is a boundary for the human condition, because at the root of the human condition is an animalistic nature. So sin is a construct. I'm saying all of this because when it comes to what we perceive to be sin and perceive to be wrong, we have to wonder why it's not wrong to another person. There are things that are wrong, but they're not wrong to another person. Molestation is wrong, not to the molester. Murder is wrong, not to the murderer. Cursing. Cursing is wrong because it shows a lack of intelligence. Tell that to somebody that curses. They will not see the wrong in that. There's a lot that is wrong, but it's not wrong to all. Yet there are wrongs that exist, traditionally and structurally, wrongs that we take to be quote unquote sin, because at the heart of the human condition is an unacknowledged immorality. And so sin is a construct over time. Remember, sin is a construct as we see it secularly. Over time has developed to control the lack of restraint, the lack of regard that every single human being that has lived this life knows exists within it. So when we're talking sin, we're talking about the concept and the construct to confine the human being, to restrict it from actually living its nature, from what it is born to and from within the invisible intelligence from which it comes out of. That's the human being, that's the human nature. The Bible doesn't look at sin in that way. The Bible doesn't look at sin in that way. The Bible being a book correcting religion, the Bible being a book actually against the conscience that is at the heart of religion. The Bible looks at sin for what is against the devotional conversation. The Bible looks at sin for what is against the philosophical outlook of the devotional conversation. The Bible looks at sin according to what is against the concept of what the devotional conversation is for the living God, for the Creator, for the mind, granting everything. When it comes to sin, according to the Bible, of which I stay in context, we are dealing with what is against the devotional conversation because that's the only body and mind the Bible is concerned with. Why? Again, the Bible understands that when you tell someone something is wrong, nobody will listen or care. You can write things on stone. That's what the example is for. Allegorically, you can write things on stone and no one will follow them because that's not how human nature works. You can give people laws and commandments and no one will follow them. They will continue to manipulate them over and over again because that's how the human nature works. At the core of the Bible knows that. The Bible understands that you can't tell somebody that thou shalt not or thou shalt. That's why the illustration is there. Remember, the Bible is a book telling you what's wrong first off before it tells you what's right. The Bible will never tell you what's right because it's always telling you what's wrong first off. You have to see what's wrong in order to understand what's right. And once you can understand what's right, the philosophical inquiry goes back to what's wrong to decipher that. That's how the Bible works. From the tree in the garden, from the male and the female created in the image of God, everything wrong is given first off so that we can understand what's right. That's Bible logic and what I like to call Bible humor because it absolutely is. When you think about it, dark humor. So when I talk about the issue of sin, I'm always looking at it from the standpoint that is within the Bible because that's how the Bible does. And when you're seeing Satan coming against Balaam, when you're seeing Satan coming against Job, when you're seeing Satan coming against the pair in Eden, they're being withstood against, they are being Sataned against because their intention or the direction that the author wants their narrative to go in is showing that what they're doing is wrong. It's wrong. But you can't tell somebody that's wrong. You can't tell somebody that the way that they govern their devotional body is wrong. Only thing you can do is highlight an illustration to get their mind thinking. And then it's up to them to make the decision as the Bible said, or as the Bible allows the individual to make a decision about their own devotional conversation, as opposed to any other religious book that a religious group or sect would use. Their book will tell them, worship me, I am God. Bible doesn't do that. Bible actually lets you make a decision, which is the art of becoming human. And that's why the individuals that have been reaching out to me since last week have been feeling as though the concept and the construct of the religious law has dehumanized them because you are not human within the concept or the construct of the religious law. You are being dehumanized. And the fact that they're realizing it and they're saying it is just so amazing to me because they don't have the words to understand what to say concerning their experience, and yet they're still saying it. And here I am, I've been studying this for um, many years now, going on 15. And I'm seeing this philosophically. They're not seeing this philosophically, and yet they're saying philosophically the response that they should have and the feeling they should have, and they can't explain it. Well, that's because, and I like to say to them, you have been sinning against your conversation. The Bible looks at the definition of sin as the philosophy of the religious law. And I break that down from the crucifixion of looking at what that body means, break that down from 1 Corinthians 15, the strength of sin is the law, here forward since that event took place. But then I also go back and give other illustrations, such as in the book of Job. And the book of Job is a curious case of what the definition of sin is when it comes to the religious law. Because you have somebody that did everything by the book. He followed the script and it still brought harm to him. And as I was going through this, it reminded me of King Herod. I just did a presentation on King Herod, and the narrative that the author of the book of Luke uses concerning the Herodian history and the Herodian lineage to reveal the identity of the characters therein. And I'm still, the subject as I've been studying it for a while now. It's very intriguing because if you can go back to that time, just to go back to that time of Herod being king, you have a Gentile, you have somebody that shouldn't be king on the throne. And so you have in the Jewish culture a belief that religious law matters. You have a belief that following religious law and doing the routine gets you or grants you favor by the divine eye. You have a belief in the Jewish community from the Jewish tradition that the religious law is everything and that their God would never put anyone on the throne that would not honor the law that is with from their blood, homeborn, or that would honor the law without directness. But you see, King Herod was not a Jew. King Herod's land, from the land of Edom, he was an Idumean by nature. The Jews conquered them and then converted them to their religion. So Herod was a Jew in name. So Herod really wasn't a Jew, despite his historical the references to him sacrificing, doing what he had to do to please the Jews, which he did for political reasons. He built the Grand Temple, which he did for political reasons. If you had to be alive back then and you saw Herod the king on the throne, you saw an Edomite on the throne. This is Esau. Remember, in the book of Malachi, it says God hates Esau. So you have the bloodline of Esau sitting on the throne of David. To the individuals back then who were Jews that were Gentiles, this was revolutionary. This was revolutionary because you have Jews that say that their law is everything. In the book of John, it says those that don't know the law are cursed. Herod wasn't cursed. Herod was not cursed. However, Herod got to the throne, he was actually blessed to sit on the throne, and he was not a Jew by nature. He was not a homeborn Jew. He was a Jew by converted Jew. He was a Gentile Jew. You have a Gentile Jew sitting on the throne. What does that translate to the actual Jew sitting there? More importantly, what does that translate to the Gentile Jew sitting there? The Gentile Jew sitting there and seeing Herod on the throne is going, this is the time of the Gentiles. This is the time of the Gentile Jew. These Jews have been following their law and have been seeking for righteousness the entire time. They have not attained to their righteousness. One, two, they have been doing their law, and there is not a David sitting on their throne, but there is a Herod. And let's just not get into the fact that David was not a homeborn Jew. David's blood is Moabite blood because his great grandmother Ruth was a Moabitess. So David was not a pure-blooded Hebrew Jew, however they want to say it. David was also half and half. I don't want to get into that one, but I'm just saying from that lineage point on, David's blood became royal. So you have somebody that's not of David's blood sitting on that throne. That is not the royal blood of David. And the author of the book of Luke takes full advantage of this. The author of the book of Luke, when they talk about Elijah, when they talk about the spirit of Elijah, and when they talk about their character called John to appear in the spirit of Elijah, what's the illustration that the author of the book of Luke uses to describe what the spirit of Elijah is? Well, first off, the character Jesus lets them know that when it comes to the spirit of Elijah, he said to them when he was in the temple saying, the spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach all this and to preach all that. After he said all that, he says, there was Elias in the day that came only to the Syrian, to the woman. And then after he quotes Elijah going to the Gentile, he quotes Elisha also going to the Gentile and telling that individual to dip and to come up from the water fresh in skin. And then he says, they went to the Gentiles. And then the individuals in the synagogue started picking up rocks to throw him in to cast him out, because you have Jesus saying that the time of the Gentiles is. Why? Why is the author of the book of Luke, when it comes to the spirit of Elijah, highlighting of all the events of Elijah's life that are recorded, highlighting the fact that Elijah was sent to Gentiles? Because John is supposed to be the one that gives that message. because at the time that this is being written, and the history of when for who this is written for, you have a Gentile king. You have a Gentile king. And the author of the book of Luke is working in the narrative of the age that the individual that committed themselves to sin, to escape sin by the law, are not sitting on the throne. But the ones that sought for righteousness from the law, not being homeborn, got that righteousness not by actually doing, but by the executed faith therein. And so I'm highlighting this point. I'm highlighting this aspect of the age of King Herod and how that may have looked to the Jew and then also to the Gentile Jew, and how that may have gone forward into the narrative in the opening stages of the book of Luke to set the setting there, because of what the book of Job is saying concerning the definition of sin by the religious law, and how the outlook of from the book of Numbers concerning Balaam and the angel that he saw is highlighting the definition of sin therein. In every instance, a commitment to do wrong in some sort against the devotional character of the supposed divine one is brought up and is Sataned against. Balaam was Sataned against. Job was Sataned against. Every individual from the either royal or not royal class of the Jews, they were Sataned against because Herod became king. This issue of the religious law and maintaining it, and understanding that as you're doing it, you're exercising faith in it. Well, to the Bible's mind, there's a controversy there because, as it says in the book of Galatians, the law is without faith. Now, it takes faith to do. It takes faith to believe, I should say, but it doesn't take faith to do. Herod may not have been a full-blooded Jew, but he still did the offerings and sacrifices. He still did them. That's not what got him his position, at least to the mind back then, to the Gentile Jew back then. What got Herod his position was not what he did, but it was how he did it. It wasn't the act, it was the art that came with the act. And this is the argument of Paul. It's not about the act. No man is justified by the law in the sight of God, he says in Romans 3. It's the art of not faith by works, but by what is worked by an exercised faith. And so this leads again into the discussion of, if such is an art, then for what need is the religious law? And this is the argument of Romans chapter 2, because the Gentiles that would do, well, they're not doing as a Jew, they're actually doing, and if they don't do, they're manifesting from their conscience, showing what is written within their heart. And so the argument of Paul is the argument of the author of the book of Luke, inserting what the spirit of Elijah is as he came to the Gentiles, which has to do with a lot of what the age and the generation is reflecting when it comes to the one sitting on the throne, who is a Gentile Jew, not a Jew, not an individual that is from the blood of David, which goes back to the book of Job, which goes back to the book of Balaam, which goes back to Eden. The idea of the religious law, as appealing as it may be to the human nature, as sin is a construct to the human nature, so is the religious law. Sin is a philosophical construct that was invented to regulate human nature. You need to know what's wrong. You need to know what's sin. You need to know this. You need to know that. You need to know this, because we are a society of conscious beings. You need that construct. When it comes to the religious law, you need that construct. But there's a difference, according to the Bible. Because to the Bible's mind, the society within you is more important than the society around you. Why? Because if the society within you is not well, you will hurt the society around you. So while our secular society wants to help the society for the sake of somehow bettering what is within the individual, the Bible does the reverse. The Bible wants to heal the society within, because only when the society within is healed can we, as an inward personal entity that we are, better the sphere around us. And so when it comes to the definition of sin, in the Bible, at its core, seeing the philosophy of the religious law fulfilling that definition so true and so full, the construct against the conscience only moves the individual to do the same thing to another. The constraint and the construct of constraint, I should say, against the conscience only moves the individual to do the same to another. So if your religion is telling you to be strict to yourself, you're going to subconsciously and or even consciously constrict another, because that's how you're brought up, your religious mind is brought up. And because we are not simply physical beings, we don't really realize that the devotional mind actually regulates our human mind. So when our devotional construct is with constriction, we are going to live by constriction and demand that others do the same. That's how somebody that lives by constriction can get so angry at somebody for behaving a certain way, or for saying a certain thing, or for dressing a certain way. That's how you can see that in cultures where the women are dominated and religion is elevated, women need to be controlled, because that's what the religion does. It controls. I'm just using that as an example. The Bible isn't so. The Bible gives you the right to decide your level of consciousness and the height that it can attain. Again, that's what makes us human, is the ability to decide. And to wake an individual up to the fact that your level of decision making fails by the religious law, Bible Bible won't just flat out do that, because the Bible's mind understands that the human nature will always argue against constriction or the lack thereof. For some reason, as I've gone through in my justification, the blueprint is constriction. Life's blueprint is constriction. Think about when you believe somebody does something wrong to you. The first thing that we do is we create a story in our head constricting our belief about what we think has been done to us. We naturally go to the creation of narrative when we think that somebody has done something wrong to us. And we like to live by that constriction for the sake of believing or justifying whatever we're feeling. It's just natural. That's just who we are. And religion, in a sense, plays off of the natural realm of the human being, because the constriction therein is what we are naturally going to gravitate to. Yet, the individual minds that reach out to me, I'm proud of them, because they're going against their nature by saying and understanding that they are feeling dehumanized by not being able to make a decision about how to act out of the level of intelligence that they know their conversation has or should have. That's justification. At the core, that's the Bible's definition of justification. Justification, again, means cleansing. This idea or term of cleansing, and I'm remaining in the context of the Bible, would not exist unless there was something that needed to be cleansed. Into the Bible's mind, what needs to be cleansed is the conversation. The conversation needs to be cleansed from its routine according to the code of Moses. The blueprint of what the religious world's nature is what our conversation is conceived through. And to the Bible's mind, that's wrong. Bible knows this. We don't know this. Bible can't tell us. We will argue against it. That's just how things go. But the Bible works from within. And so when we're seeing Job Sataned against, when we're seeing Balaam Sataned against, when we're seeing the Jews Sataned against by the Herodian dynasty, and then, after that, there is no king of the Jews anymore. Their kingdom is gone, Sataned against, 70 AD by the Romans. All of their beliefs relying on doing an act, doing a deed. Where did it get them? It didn't get them the kingship. It didn't get them cursed. I'm speaking of Balaam here. because he was corrected. Where did it get Job? Job got a moment to reflect on the fact that he was just doing his things just to do them because he believed that the crop god would take care of his crops. But the crop god caused his economy to fail and his crops to dissipate. What do you do? Well, you begin to see how worthless this is until you look within. And that's what Job did. Job began to understand that it's really not about the crop god. It's really not about the routine to the crop god. It's really about my relation to the mind instituting what is going on within me, which is why the character Elihu in the book of Job is so important because he sets that straight. And so the definition of sin, as I've come across since last Tuesday, and then putting that into the perspective of being Sataned against, well, that's really something that draws attention because the way that the Bible sees the definition of sin, it's really not the way that we see it. We see sin as the construct against the human nature. Bible sees sin against construct against the devotional conversations, thoughts, and feelings. So we really can't mix the two because if we do mix the two, we're going to end up with a very secular human religious experience, of which will be very unpleasing to us. And so I'll end here and with the thought of, as usual, creation. As everything that we go throughout this week, keep it for the purpose of creation. But at the same time, remember to understand to regulate, as I will with you, the idea of being Sataned against. And Sataned against for doing something that is contrary to the character of the living God. So Job did everything that he believed was not contrary and was Sataned against. The Jews did everything that they believed was not contrary, and not only were they destroyed and their religion evaporated, but prior to that, they had the Herodian dynasty ruling over them, which were Gentile Jews by nature. Before that, they had the Hasmonean dynasty, which we could say were Jews by nature, but that got overrun by the Herodians. So the idea of doing for the sake of doing, the idea of taking righteousness by the religious law, the very last line of Galatians 2, if righteousness come by the law, then Christ is dead in vain. I mean, that's blatant. And yet it will be ignored because it is in the human nature to argue against what makes sense, especially to the being. But to the individual out there that is not arguing against what makes sense to their being, that is finding a level of dehumanization within the constriction, within the boundary called religion, props. Because the Bible's main focus is an exodus from that to understanding a plot or a land, I should say, a land or a territory, a region for your individual personal sanctuary's character to match the character of the one that brought you there. You have to know the one that brought you there. Religious laws can't get you to the one that brought you there. You're only going to be to the constraint of the conscience of the human mind that gave you those laws. You're going to be in service to that human mind. Give the conversation up to the invisible as it is. And then that's how creation happens. That's how we know the living God is creator. That's the advice in the book of Peter. Give to yourself unto the Lord as unto a creator. You can only do that. Where is God that you can prove that he is a creator? The trees are done. Grass, they die and come back. Where can you see anything of the creator's work that is yet to be created, or that is a creation? Who can be convinced that the trees are actually from any creator? Who can? Unless you're imagining that. You'd be lying to yourself. But the individual that is willing to give their invisible body of faith to the invisible mind, well, they can understand physical creation because it will take place within. That's the essence. And for this week, regulating such an essence, such a character, That is what is supposed to or should ground us in a higher understanding of where practically our conversation should go, and to where practically we should envision our conversation not simply being, but remaining.